morning to you and thank you for your company. As we go to air this morning, unbelievable and disturbing scenes are unfolding in the United States. These are live images of the chaos unfolding in the Capitol right now as pro-Trump supporters swarm the streets. Protesters are now inside the chamber. Tear gas has been deployed to try and bring the situation under control. Congress members, they are sheltering in place and they've been told to wear gas masks.
The President responded to these scenes moments ago saying, quote, "Please support our Capitol Police and law enforcement. They are truly on the side of our country. Stay peaceful." This was the scene a little earlier as crowds broke into the Capitol building chanting USA, USA.
It is chilling. It didn't take long for the violence to take hold. The anarchists clashing with guards, trying their best to keep them from further entering the building. There are reports now that congressional staff have received at least 2 suspicious packages within the building. All this as riots take hold on the streets outside, people scaling buildings, punching police officers, unleashing violence.
The Mayor of Washington, D.C. has now ordered the entire city into a 6 p.m. curfew. Let's go now to our US correspondent, Amelia Adams, who's in Washington, D.C., at the centre of all of this. Amelia, we don't have her right now, but look, there were reports. We will try to get Amelia up in a second, but there are reports out there were shots fired inside the Capitol as well. There was a standoff with the police or armed security there with somebody. There's a photo going around of somebody in on Nancy Pelosi's chair now with their fist in the air. They've basically overrun the Capitol building.
It's extraordinary to think, you know, amidst the Black Lives Matter protests, the heavy police National Guard presence that was there at the time, tear gas being fired at protesters at that time. For whatever reason, the police presence is much thinner there today. They knew this rally was coming. There were thousands gathered in Washington for this pro-Trump rally as Trump refused to concede once again. Inside the chamber, US President-elect Joe Biden was being essentially confirmed as the incoming president. This is the image David was talking about moments ago of a protester sitting at the Speaker's chair inside the chamber.
And it's hard to believe this is actually happening, although at the same time it's also not hard to believe. You know, when you fill a group of people's minds with sort of hate and vitriol and saying we will not concede, we will not lose, which is what the President did merely an hour and a half ago at his rally, then to try and say, well, no, don't do this, is going to be hard for the President to sort of roll those words back. There are calls online that maybe, you know, from some congressmen saying that the President should stand down and concede or face impeachment again. We do know that the National Guard has been called and should be there within moments, we would hope.
We have more and more footage coming from inside the Capitol building right now. Let's take a quick look at that. That was the moment that the protesters smashed their way through the doors and into the building, which is nothing we've ever seen before. We've been talking for months about, you know, the deep fractures across America around this election. We're now looking at a failed state, essentially.
Well, and the election, that was successful. You know, there are allegations of fraud and there is allegations of, you know, vote counting not going right. There is no evidence of that. And it's good to remind us here in Australia that, you know, this election went the way it should have gone. Unfortunately, for President Trump, that did not go his way. For his supporters, that did not go their way too. That is how the democratic process goes.
We have re-established our connection now to reporter Amelia Adams on the ground in Washington. Amelia, what is the latest there?
Oh, they're Australian. Stop 2020.
Okay.
Yeah, Sylvia and David, it's a very tense situation. We've actually just seen several people with Trump flag supporters who are inside and up at the windows inside the Capitol building. We've moved up here so we could get a bit of a signal to talk to you. A lot of anxiety as people kind of come and go, and we see those pictures of people inside the chamber. We know, as you've mentioned, lawmakers and the Vice President have been evacuated. We're actually just looking to see the next move from law enforcement. At the moment, here is just a lot of people milling around, still moving towards the doors and still, as you can see, up around the balconies of the building and trying to make their way inside. We can hear a lot of sirens. We can see a lot of tear gas coming from the other side of the Capitol. And we did see a line of riot police marching up about half an hour ago. Down on the lawn there, I can see a few more police coming up now. Just seems to be a great deal of confusion, to be honest, which is quite incredible given what has gone on here over the last hour. Just extraordinary. We watched people climbing up the walls, barging their way through barricades. Essentially, we've seen the Capitol building under siege by supporters of the outgoing president. He asked them to come here, Sylvia.
Amelia, law enforcement are clearly utterly overwhelmed here. How would you describe the police presence on the ground there today?
They cheated. They cheated. You gotta watch the liberal news. This is Channel 9 liberal news for us. Way to go, guys.
Look, I'm not seeing a lot of police, and it's really difficult to tell because obviously, as you mentioned earlier, National Guard were deployed and activated ready for today. I know the entire DC police force was on alert as well, so they were definitely ready for it. And look, you don't always see the police force in Washington. They're very, very well trained in protests and riots and marches. But that said, given what has evolved here in the past hour, it is quite alarming to sort of look around and say, where are the law enforcement? Initially, they were holding back some of the protesters on the steps. They pretty quickly barged through. So we're just waiting to see what the next move will be. But you can probably see there through our pictures that more and more of the supporters are really just making their way up to the windows and the doors, and many of them trying to get inside as well. And as we've seen, there are already people inside the building, which has resulted in lawmakers being evacuated. So we're watching and we're waiting. I've just had an alert on my phone from the city, from the District of Columbia, that is alerting us that there is now a citywide curfew in place. That kicks in at 6 p.m, which is probably not that far away. So it'll be interesting to see how law enforcement manage that situation as it moves towards curfew, and they'll presumably, as we've seen them do before in these situations, begin to clear the streets. And there are thousands and thousands of supporters here, and I can tell you they are not going anywhere.
Amelia, you were there on the ground during the Black Lives Matter protest in Washington, D.C. Can you take a different sort of temperature gauge of what's happening here and how that feels to you compared to the protest before?
The situation turned in that situation really quickly, David, and I think there was a lot more visible police presence. In fact, there were lines of riot police and parks police and National Guard as well, with their barricades, with their shields, and that was sort of facing off against protesters. Here we've sort of all culminated. I'm just amazed at how close all of these protesters have been able to get to the Capitol building. I would have thought, given that they had plenty of warning, that the president was encouraging them all to march up here, that there would be a little bit more in place. But obviously there wasn't. They were quite easily able to, this afternoon, make their way over the balcony, as we've seen inside as well. In terms of the atmosphere, look, I want to say at the moment there are plenty of people here who are just very patriotic and very passionate, and they're talking about making history. There are, though, also some very, very angry people and people who are talking about violence and who are talking about taking back the People's House. This is the People's House. This is the US Capitol building. They believe that it has been stolen from them. The election has been stolen from them and Donald Trump, and therefore they will be taking it back today.
We've just heard via Fox News, they are reporting that one person has been shot inside the Capitol building. We have a picture, I understand, from inside the building of guns drawn. This is inside what would have to be one of the most secure buildings in the world. Guns drawn inside the Capitol building right now as protesters take over the Senate chamber. It's absolutely extraordinary and chilling to see this all unfold this morning. As Amelia mentioned, there is a citywide curfew being imposed from 6 p.m. As protesters there, you can see, still gathering on the steps, on the balcony of the Capitol building. Police clearly, utterly overwhelmed by this crowd of protesters.
And, you know, it's fair to say that we haven't seen anything remotely like this before in our lifetime. The president, merely hours ago, winding up a crowd, as he always does at his rallies, with his greatest hits of this fraud of an election. This is our country. I will not concede. But then he really riled them up, and this is the consequence of that. The fact that there was no National Guard ready to go or police presence that was ready to go to cope with this seems extraordinary considering what happened in the summer with the Black Lives Matter movement. But this is truly chilling, some of these shots. I am hearing that there's a woman has been taken out. I'm seeing on Twitter at the moment through sources on a stretcher. A bloodied woman has been taken out on a stretcher. I mean, this will end in more violence if it isn't put under control. We're
standing by to hear from Joe Biden. He is due to address the nation, to address the media shortly. As soon as that happens, we will bring it to you. That is a live shot there.